everyone, and welcome to today's mid-afternoon masterclass, one of the marquee events of the University of Melbourne's 10th Annual Science Festival as part of National Science Week. My name is Julia and I will be your host for today's masterclass and all the masterclasses happening this week at 2 p.m. So today we are actually coming to you live from the National Meteorological Library at the Bureau of Meteorology. As a host, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which we are filming, the Wurundjeri people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are this country's first scientists with deep and enduring knowledge of the land, waters and skies. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I welcome all First Nations people here today. In making this acknowledgement, we commit to respectful and responsible conduct towards all others according to the traditional laws of this land, particularly at times of formal ceremony. Today's event is Hunting Weather History to Prepare for the Future with Dr. Linden Ashcroft. So Linden is a lecturer in climate science and science communication. Her career has included a stint here at the Bureau of Meteorology and also managing a national citizen science project. Her research uncovers pre-1900 documents and weather observations to improve understanding of Australia's past climate so we can better plan for the future. Very exciting. Hi Linden, how are you going?
Hi Julia, I'm good. I'm
Great.
very thrilled to be here today, back here at the Bureau of Meteorology, National Meteorological Library, where I spent a lot of time during my PhD doing a lot of research. So it's a thrill to be sharing this space today.
So great, yeah. You're back to your second home.
I am, yes. I feel very comfortable here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so today how this will work. So Linden will do your 20-minute presentation for everyone. Then we will be handing over to you guys. We will take questions from the audience. Now, at that point, we'll also be welcoming another special guest, hence the other chair that you might have noticed, but we'll leave that as a bit of a surprise. And then we'll aim to finish up about 2:45. Now, at any time you can put in a question, and to do that, just put it in the chat. So the chat's open, just add any other comments as well if you'd like. Any emojis, clapping, cheering emojis, weather emojis, I mean, on theme, whatever you'd like to do. Now, to make sure everything is already working, how about, could everyone out there open up the chat and let us know where you're zooming in from? City, suburb, country. I know this has been a bit of an international audience. And look, you know, for bonus points, let us know what the weather's like, you know, on theme indeed. So pop in the chat now. Okay, so we've got Point Cook. Point Cook has been here every single day. So thank you so much for joining us again. Coburg, lots of people zooming in. Keep putting it into the chat, everyone. Who else is here? And what's the weather? That's right. Oh, we've got a lot of people coming in. Okay, all right. Cloudy and partful, thank you, thank you. All right. Great, well there we go. I will hand over to you now and hear your presentation.
Wonderful, thanks Julia, and thanks so much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. As I said, I'm really thrilled to be here in the National Meteorological Library on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation to share some of this Western history with you today about our weather and our climate. Now, we could be talking about anything, right? We love talking about the weather in this country, probably more than most other countries, although it is a popular topic of conversation all around the world. So we could talk about anything today, and I could be on your screens for hours and hours, but we don't have that much time. So let's pick a type of event that is particularly impactful. And I want you to tell me, I think a poll should come up in a minute, what you think the most deadly type of disaster is. Is it fire, flood, heat, or drought? What's the most deadly kind of disaster, weather-related disaster? Just have a think in terms of deaths to people.
Awesome. So that poll should be coming out for everyone right now. So pop in your answer and we'll see what everyone thinks.
Yeah, fire, flood, heat or drought.
Indeed. We all experience it, and so do the kangaroos.
That's right, yes. Australia has one of the most variable climates in the world in terms of our swings from drought to flooding rains, really hot events and then really cold conditions as well. So we do big swings, but which one of those is the most deadly, do you think? How are we doing?
Poll hasn't come up yet. Let's see what the answers are. Has everyone put their answer in? Okay, we've got the answers. Thank you. Okay, so, all right, heat wave, 57%. That seems to be the most popular. Next, drought, 19%, flood, 14% even, and then fire, 11%.
Wow. Oh, I thought fire would be the top one, but well done. You are correct. Heat waves are the most deadly weather-related phenomenon for humans. For example, in 2009, we had the devastating Black Saturday bushfires across Victoria, and 173 people sadly lost their lives as a result of those fires. But 3 times as many people passed away in the heat wave during the week preceding that bushfire. So the heat waves can be really devastating and can cause a lot more deaths than some of those other incidences. In fact, more than floods and cyclones and bushfires combined. So heat is a really big issue, which means I think today we should focus on a heat wave. So let's look at a heat wave. I have picked a heat wave from Perth in Western Australia in the middle of January 1903. So you can see a quote there. Let me see if I can get it out and I'll read it to you. I printed it out. It says, during the past few days, the heat has been so intense in Perth as to be almost unbearable. The cyclone, which was on its way to us with a cool change, has broken down and has returned to the Indian Ocean for repairs. How good's that? The river has been the only place where cool atmospheres could be observed. Nightly, the boats of the Royal Affair Pleasure Boat Company are being rushed by those whose one desire is to escape the torrid heat of the sun-scorched land. How's that? So good. We have even more newspaper evidence that there was a heat wave during this time in 1903 in Perth. In the Geraldton Advertiser, Geraldton's a bit north of Perth, they reported that a man dropped dead on the 16th of January, dropped dead while riding a bike along the road, which is very sad, and the death is supposed to be due to excess heat. I also have here, from one of these lovely shelves behind me, a summary of weather and rain across Western Australia, and for 1903 it says, on the 16th of January, excessively hot weather prevailed, a man and horse both succumbed to the heat.
Man and horse.
Man and horse. Heartbreaking, really heartbreaking. All right, so according to these documentary sources of information, according to the newspaper, it was pretty hot in mid-January 1903 in Perth. But if you were to list your most trusted sources of information, would newspapers be at the top? If you were to get weather and climate information, if you were to explore this event in more detail, where else would you look? I mean, I'm a climate scientist by training. My interest is in numbers. So I'm not going to just take these stories and take them as fact, right? We need to be detectives here. We need to be sceptical about this kind of story that's being told. So I want to hear from you in the chat about where we could find some more information out about this heat wave. What sort of sources could we use to explore the weather and climate of the past? Now, I should probably put in a difference here between weather and climate. So the weather is what we expect. No, that's not right at all. The climate is what we expect, and the weather is what we get. So the weather is what you can see outside every day, but the climate is the average of that weather. As you're typing in your answers to how you think we could find out more information about this heat wave, I want to share an analogy that I actually learnt while I was working here at the Bureau, is that the climate is your wardrobe, right? All the clothes that you have in your wardrobe. But the weather is the item of clothing that you'll pick out every day to wear. So depending on where you live, you might have different things in your wardrobe, right? But you might pick out the same thing as somebody who lives far away on a particular day. So that's the difference between weather and climate. And where can we find out more? What sort of sources can we use to find out more information about our past weather and climate?
Yep, so pop your answers in the chat, everyone. See what you think might come up.
One suggestion that I thought might come up, and maybe this is because I work in the School of Geography, Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, where we have a lot of people who go out and do exciting field work, is natural recorders of our climate. Something like tree rings, trees that lay down layers every year that can tell us about temperature and rainfall variations. Coral also does that. So coral skeletons get another layer on them every year, and they can tell us about freshwater runoff into the ocean, which tells us about rainfall variations. Ice cores can do that too. So ice lays down traps little bubbles of air that we can use to understand the weather that was experienced and the climate that was experienced down in Antarctica. Actually, there's a really cool study published recently that used ice core information to understand weather systems over Australia, which I think is really fascinating. Things like stalactites, stalagmites, lake deposits, all that kind of stuff, they can all tell us about the climate of our past, and they're fascinating. But for what we're looking at today, for this heat wave, they're just not quite high resolution enough. They're not quite as specific enough. I think another suggestion that might have come up in the chat is traditional knowledge or Indigenous knowledge. And of course, if your ancestors had lived on the land for hundreds and thousands of generations, then you would definitely have a very sophisticated understanding of the weather and the climate of a place. And that information is being appreciated more and more by Western science as we figure out how to avoid the worst of climate change. But again, and I'm not an expert in this field, but my understanding is that the way this information is kept doesn't necessarily tie it to individual heat waves, like the one that we're talking about in 1903. So what other suggestions have we got?
Well, the chat is being a bit quiet though, so I'm a bit worried about my connection might not be that great. So keep them coming in if they are, but I'll try and figure that out. But I mean, my suggestion is some of the things that are right in front of you, right here. I mean, I don't know.
That's a great suggestion, Julie. Exactly. And of course, you know, as a scientist, my first port of call is always going to be numbers. It's always going to be the weather observations. We see something written down about hot weather. We want to know, all right, well, how hot was it? Like, how hot are we talking here? And we have weather observations for Australia all the way back to European colonisation in 1788. So this is a picture here of the first instrumental weather observations for Australia taken by Lieutenant William Dawes, who was an astronomer on the First Fleet. He took weather observations right near the southern pylon of where the Sydney Harbour Bridge now stands, and he took weather records for about 3 years, from 1788 to 1791. And there's his beautiful handwriting there. You can see he recorded the temperature and the air pressure. He wrote down when it rained and all of these beautiful things. He also tried to look for Halley's Comet, I believe, but he missed it, which was a shame. There are plenty of observations like that here at the Bureau of Meteorology as well. I've picked some of my favourites to share. I'll start with the oldest first, I think. This one here comes from Port Arthur in Tasmania. So we've got observations from Tassie from around the 1820s on and off, and then continuously from about 1840. And these records were organised by Lieutenant Thomas Lempriere. And he took weather records himself, but he also got convicts to take weather records. And that means that while these tables are beautiful, in terms of reliability, they're not great because different people took the observations at different times and the weather instruments kept moving around. So they're very early, but in terms of trustworthiness, they're a little bit tricky. This incredible book here is just one of the registers that are housed in the rare book room from the Bureau of Meteorology. Oh my goodness. And these are hourly records taken at the Melbourne Observatory, which is at Flagstaff Hill at the time, just near where Flagstaff Station is at the moment. And these are observations, if you can see, every hour. Temperature, air pressure, cloud type, wind, whether rain has fallen. These were taken in a really detailed way and can give us an incredible understanding of what the weather was like back then. This one here is from the 22nd of May 1860. Fearful squalls with clouds of dust and a force of wind that was occasionally 7 and 8. That's like as windy as it can get. And a veil all around the sky, which is just incredible description. So these sort of observations were taken in a formal way, and you can probably say they're a little bit more reliable than something like these ones. I wanted to share this other image. This comes from a register of weather observations in the 1840s from South Australia. And now you often think, okay, numbers they're the closest thing we have to the truth, right? They are objective, they are pure, they were taken not by people but by instruments, and modern observations are taken, you know, by machines and that kind of stuff. But of course, there are people behind all of these numbers. And this example here from August 1844, if you see in the middle there, there's something written and I can't remember the exact words, maybe you can see it better on your screen, but it said, there was a holiday on Saturday in honour of Captain Sturt leaving on his expedition. So there was an explorer, Sturt, who was going into the interior part of Australia. And so the observers took the day off, and that means we don't have weather observations for that time, although they do say that the weather was fine, which was good for the first day of the expedition, I suppose. So we have to think about the people behind who took these observations and any issues that aren't related to weather and climate that might affect them. So, for example, nowadays we like to keep our thermometers in a stand that you can see right at the back of that image, and actually you can see one here as well. If you can see this one here, you see these boxes around. That is a sign that you are near a weather station. This is a Stevenson screen where we like to keep thermometers because that gives us the best indication of what the actual temperature of the air was like. But before about the early 1900s, thermometers were kept in all kinds of places, including these sorts of stands that you can see on the image. I've even seen records of a thermometer's being kept in beer crates, which is, not a great way to capture the temperature of the ambient air. And this kind of information, or data about data, is known as metadata. That book over there, Julia, if you could pass it to me. Here is an example of an observation or an instrument book where all of the instruments that were used to record temperature, pressure, rain, all of that kind of stuff, they're written down for all of the stations across the various colonies in Australia before Federation occurred in 1901. So this information is almost just as important as the information about the actual weather and climate that was recorded. And we need that to help us understand how reliable our temperature observations were. Now, you might think all of that kind of stuff only matters for past weather records. It doesn't matter for modern observations now. Everything now is streamlined and automatic. We don't have to worry. But unfortunately, we still have to think about all of this stuff because there's still people involved in these weather stations. There's a lot of volunteers around Australia who record rainfall, for example. And I remember a news story a few years ago where a farmer, I think it was in Western Australia, he kept getting rainfall observations overnight. No one else around him was getting rainfall. He didn't see any puddles on his paddocks. And so he set up a little camera trap right next to his rain gauge to see what was going on. And sure enough, there was a nightly dingo who was visiting the rain gauge and delivering some yellow rain into the rain gauge every night and messing up the rainfall records. So these kind of things have to be taken into account. And this kind of detective work is done here in this very building every day to make sure that the climate record for Australia is as accurate as it can be. So we do have rainfall records. We do have temperature records as well for Perth in 1903. Let's see what they have to say about our heatwave in January. It looks like, you can see on those graphs there, that the middle of January 1903 was the hottest time of that year for 1903. There were 3 or 4 days which were much warmer than average, in the high 30s or the low 40s. And here is a newspaper report as well that has that instrumental information, although it's in Fahrenheit rather than Celsius. So I think the numbers pretty much agree with the newspapers in this case. Yes.
Good journalism.
It was hot. Good journalism, that's true. But I'm not done. I'm not finished.
Oh.
Where else could we get information from? Have you had any?
We have. I
Okay.
think there was something wrong with the connection. So thank you everyone for all your answers. I mean, they said the Bureau of Meteorology, which is an excellent answer. Particularly
Good
answer. Weather station records, soil. I guess you did touch on a couple of different natural ways of natural measures. Paleoclimatology, hospitals, libraries, resources and other documents, lots of books. So yeah, we had a couple of answers there. So that's great.
Sure. Hospitals is a really good idea. In the early part of the 1800s, there was this real connection between weather and health, and some of our earliest weather observations actually come from medical doctors who saw it as part of their job to record the weather to help understand how that connected to people's health. So yeah, that's a really good suggestion. And diaries are another really good source. So if we don't have numbers, we can turn to, I always get this wrong, qualitative information rather than quantitative. So descriptions of the weather and descriptions of what's going on. Again, you have to think about people's personal experiences, right, of the weather and the climate that they're seeing, and use that critical eye when examining documentary accounts. So for example, if you'd just come over to Australia from England and you'd never experienced an Australian summer before, you're probably going to describe it as incredibly, unendingly hot, right? Particularly in Adelaide or somewhere in the southern part of Australia where we don't get a lot of rain in the summer. Perth is like that as well. So you probably need to be a bit sceptical about that kind of analysis. And what we can turn to instead to supplement those descriptions is tangible metrics that we can get from qualitative information. Things like frost. If somebody wrote in their diary, it was frosty today, then we know, okay, it was probably 0 degrees or below. And this occurred in the early part of British colonisation, somebody said it was really hot in Sydney in the early part of the 1790s, and you think, oh, you're just English and you're not used to heat, but that description was accompanied by stories of bats and birds dying, dropping dead on the wing because it was so hot. And biological studies have shown that there is a temperature threshold for that that's sort of in the low 40s. So we know, okay, it was probably actually, it was really hot. And another source we can use from qualitative information is phenological data. So this is the timing of flowering, right? The flowering of plants, the behaviours of birds and those kinds of things. So the date at which a magpie first swoops you, for example, and whether that's happening earlier or later. The most famous of this kind of qualitative information is the flowering of the cherry blossoms in Japan. The record of that, or the keeping of that information, dates back to about the 1400s. And that's used by the global body that studies climate change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's in their latest big report. You can see it graphed next to those other metrics that were kept by thermometers and in other observatories. So this sort of information is really useful. Another source that I thought might come up is visual information. So photographs, footage, even artwork can be really useful. Now, I don't have any qualitative information from Perth apart from what I've shared, and I don't have any images, unfortunately, but I did want to share one of a really hot event that happened in Melbourne or in Victoria in 1851. I saw this in some data while I was doing my PhD. I graphed this information, and one day it was really hot. It was so hot, it looked like I'd made a mistake. I thought, oh, I've put a decimal point in the wrong spot. I've made a typo here. But then I looked through the newspapers and I looked through other sources, and I saw that actually, no, the 6th of February 1851 was really, really hot, and it was associated with Black Thursday, a devastating bushfire that decimated much of Western Victoria. And you can see this beautiful painting by William Strutt. It used to be housed in the State Library of Victoria. I'm not sure if it's still on display, but it's this huge big canvas that dramatises the destruction of that kind of bushfire. So these sorts of sources, we can put them all together and figure out how reliable it is, this information that there was a heatwave in Perth in 1903. Any other sources of information?
Oh, that's all I've got for you so far. Yep.
Oh, this one.
There you go.
The last one that I wanted to talk about was our actual understanding of the weather, okay? So here I have a weather map this isn't from 1903, it's from 1893, but these kinds of maps that you might see on your nightly news have been around since about the 1870s. The earliest one for Australia was, I think, about 1877. And they got faster and larger as the telegraph was developed and people could send weather observations in real time to places, and then it allowed people to map stuff. You can see the lines of high pressure and low pressure and all the little weather observations there in dots. It's just stunning, and there are a lot of these housed at the National Meteorological Library. But this one here comes from a folio of weather maps that were created by the government astronomer and meteorologist in Adelaide, Charles Todd. He took weather observations from all over the place, and he drew these maps every day, and he stuck them on the notice board in the main centre of Adelaide for people to see. And if you look at that map, you'll see that there's a big high pressure system just south of kind of Adelaide in the Great Australian Bight there. And when we get a high pressure system there, we get winds flowing around it. In the southern hemisphere, winds move anti-clockwise around a high pressure system. So that means if you're in Perth, you've got really strong hot air coming from the continental part of Australia over to you. Now, the most famous part of Perth's climate is its sea breeze, which is known as the Fremantle Doctor, and that often saves the city from really strong heat waves. But if that sea breeze fails to arrive and it doesn't cool down the city in the afternoon, which can sometimes happen when you have this particular weather setup, then yeah, you're going to get a heat wave and it's going to be hot. And that's what we see today as well. Not this exact day, but in the summer when Perth has a heat wave, that's what happens. So we can see from our understanding of the weather, it all makes sense. All right, then let's bring all that information together. The newspaper said it was hot. The weather observation said it was hot. The weather patterns say it was hot. All the other information that we've managed to pull suggests, okay, you can relax, Linden. This was actually a heat wave. Tick, wonderful. Now maybe you're thinking, okay, that was a somewhat interesting case study, but what does this have to do with climate change? This is an event that happened 120 years ago. What does it mean for today? This kind of work matters because this sort of detective exploration is done all around the world about weather observations from the past and the present. And these weather observations are the basis of all of the analysis that we do when it comes to climate change. So when you see a graph or a map that shows you that temperatures are changing or that rainfall is changing or that our weather systems are changing, you can trust it because people like me, people like the other people in this building are doing their homework. So when you see a graph like this, you can believe it. This is the climate stripes for Australia. The blue lines indicate years where temperatures have been cooler than average. So the graph goes from 1910, where we have enough weather stations across the country to make a national average. The values go from 1910 up to 2023. The more red a line is, that means it's hotter, and the more blue a line is, that means it's cooler. So there's no bonus points for guessing which side of the graph is the recent period, and you can particularly see sort of 2019 there, which was Australia's hottest year on record, followed by a couple of cooler years as we had two pretty wet years occurring. But this sort of information has been pieced together really carefully to give us the most accurate information about what's going on. The other reason why this sort of work matters and why these particular books and tables are so important for Australia is that so much of our weather knowledge and weather history comes from the Northern Hemisphere. It comes from the northern latitudes. That's because written history is longer in the northern latitudes, whereas in the southern latitudes, oral histories sort of are more dominant until the mid-1700s. But also because there's a lot more land in the Northern Hemisphere. So this video, hopefully it will work. This video shows the weather every 6 hours. Let's see if it's going to work. Yep. In 1903, in the year of that heat wave. The colours tell you the temperature, and you can see little lines and they indicate the wind. The green tells you where it might be raining. And the black dots tell you where we've got weather observations. All right, you can see them kind of pulsing in and out. Observations taken at 9 a.m, 3 p.m, 9 p.m, maybe more frequently in other parts. And then you'll also notice the cloud. Now the cloud isn't telling you where there's cloud. It's telling you where we do not have enough weather observations to get a good picture of what's actually going on. And hopefully what you can see is that we know much less, there's a lot more cloud in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere. So every one of these that we can find, every one of these books, every one of these diaries and archives, I've found weather observations in attics, in libraries. I've had farming communities contact me. I've had state libraries contacting me saying, I've found these books, are they of use? And most of the time, yes, they are, because they allow us to add more black dots on this map and lift that cloud and lift that fog, which improves understanding for Australia and the Southern Hemisphere and for the world. Now, the final reason why this stuff matters, and the reason why I picked this particular heatwave to tell you about, is because we can use these past events to get a sense of what the future might look like. So here's a map of our original heatwave in the middle of January 1903. The top map shows you the actual temperature, and the bottom map shows you how different it is for them from the January average. So red values warmer than average, cool values are in blue. Cooler than average values are in blue. You can see around Perth and in southwest Western Australia, according to this analysis, it was kind of 5-6 degrees warmer than average. Now, we want to run that experiment. We want to see what this heat wave would look like if we just heated the whole world by 2 degrees, okay? It looks a bit like that. You might think, well, everything's just going to get 2 degrees hotter, but actually no, you can see that the heat distribution has changed a bit. Our temperatures are sort of 3-4 degrees warmer in different parts of Australia. And we can use this information to kind of tell stories for ourselves and for people making decisions to get ready for what a world that's 2 degrees warmer might look like. And this can be a really powerful way to connect people with the importance of acting on climate change. So I will always defend these sepia pieces of paper, these beautiful books in this building, because I know they have some really great stories to tell, and they're a very important part of piecing together the best source of information we have to address climate change. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Linden. That was fascinating. And to see all the books and to tie it all together with all those images and the videos, it's amazing. And definitely a big shout out to the sepia data.
Definitely. We're so lucky that so much of this has been preserved, because a lot of people think, oh, this is just numbers, I'm going to throw it away, but please don't throw them away.
Absolutely not. No, it's fascinating, and there's just so much here to look at. Thank you for the presentation. Now, as I said, we're going to go over to you in the audience with all your questions. We've already had some questions coming in, which is awesome. So we've got about 15 minutes, so we've got a decent amount of time to get through some of them. But as promised, we do have an extra guest, though. So right now, I will bring in Angus Hines, meteorologist from the Bureau. Since we are here, we obviously need someone from the Bureau of Meteorology. Thank you so much for also joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was
worries.
Captivating. It was amazing. I was just watching off from the side. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Well done.
Thank you. Beautiful numbers to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kick us off, John, and just tell us a little bit about what you do here at the Bureau.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. My name's Angus. I'm a meteorologist here at the Bureau of Meteorology, and I work in our community information team. And what that really means is my main role is getting the most important weather information for the day out to the Australian public, to as many people as possible, whether that's severe weather or interesting or unusual or unique weather. And we do that through traditional media, television, radio, newspaper, but of course we do a lot of it through social media, online outlets as well. So it's a great job connecting with the Australian public and letting them know the most important weather stories for the day.
Absolutely. I mean, very important from the extreme, but also what do we wear? It's very, very important. Do I bring the umbrella today? I don't know.
Exactly.
But thanks to you, I do know. That's the thing. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So we've got both of you to answer all these questions. We do have some questions coming in, but some of you out there might have had a look and found a few things in the back here. So I thought maybe we also might just have a quick look at these instruments behind us and have a bit of a chat about them before going to other questions. I don't know who wants to start off. Angus, Linden. Linden, do you want to maybe start off with a couple of important points?
We can start with this one, because this is the piece of equipment that I think we knew the least about.
Right, yeah. Learned about it today.
We learned about it today, and the wonderful librarian here, Galina, told us all about it. This is it's a comptometer, which is a really early mechanical calculator. So it was a calculator that was used before the start of the Second World War to do calculations. The Bureau of Meteorology used that to do calculations of their averages and those kinds of things. So it's a very precious item. This one, you know.
Yeah, this is one we had seen before, one of these. This is a barograph. So it's an old weather observing tool that would measure the atmospheric pressure, which is very important, but it wouldn't just measure it, it would also trace it out on that little scroll of paper there. Over the course of a day, it would track along and a little pencil would draw out so you could see the ups and downs of the pressure. And particularly before everyone had lots of access to satellite images where you could see the weather from the top down, which we have now when we're weather forecasting, knowing the changes in pressure, whether it's rising, whether it's falling, and how quickly it's changing was really, really important. So having that little graph was fantastic for early weather forecasting.
So great. Maybe one final one. I know I've been eyeing off this little book here too.
This little book, we forgot the book. This is, I'm going to touch it. Hopefully I don't drop it.
Very delicate, very delicate.
This is the oldest book in this library. It's written in Latin by Francis Bacon, and I think it's from the 1400s. It's called the
1648.
1648. The History of the Winds, 1648. It's not Australian, like it's not about Australian history, so I don't know that much about it. But yeah, 1648, The History of the Winds, and it's the oldest, most rare book in this library. So I'm going to put it back before I drop it. I'm just going to put it back there.
So great. Thank you. I mean, it's so fascinating, all the things we can see here. Okay, so we'll go into a couple of questions. First one from Alexa. So thank you, Alexa, for the question. So we've all seen the recent aurora activity around Victoria lately. Do you have any descriptions of auroras from early weather diaries? Good question.
Yes, I've seen some beautiful descriptions. I remember seeing some, there was some really detailed observations taken in South Head, just sort of as you enter Sydney Cove, from the 1840s to 1855, and I remember seeing beautiful descriptions from the Observer there about auroras all the way as far north as Sydney, which before this year I thought, wow, that's astounding, but now this year we've seen quite a few, which is just remarkable. So yes, descriptions of auroras. I think we might have even seen one in here just before. There was a word we couldn't read that could have been aurora, but we don't know. So yeah, definitely that was taken before a lot of light pollution made it harder to see them.
Yeah, amazing. Lots of things in those descriptions. Okay, so now one from Linden. Thank you for your question as well. So what's your favourite weather diary and weather description you've come across? Possibly one of the ones you read out, I don't know.
You know what? There is a really heavy rainfall event that happened in Sydney in 1841. The same person who saw the aurora, he had to stay up all night and he had to keep emptying the rain gauge because it was overflowing and overflowing. And I find this event fascinating because there were lots of newspaper accounts at the time. The governor and his wife were going on a horse and carriage through the streets to go to a show, and the puddles were so big that they fell in and somebody had to save them. It was a whole big thing. But also that rainfall event, if you trust the numbers, and even if you kind of put in some inaccuracies, you think it might not be completely accurate, it's one of the wettest rainfall events that has ever been recorded in Sydney. And it happened in the 1840s, which indicates that on top of climate change, there could be some really heavy rainfall events that are possible to fall in Sydney. So that one is just one of the really interesting events. And I just really like reading the detailed records that people take. And I love seeing frosts as well when it's really cold, or when it snows. I love reading the descriptions of snow. As I do today.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you spent much time in the library, Angus, with your work and seen many of these old books, or are you learning?
Probably not as much as I should have, given the amazing range and catalogue and how far back it goes. But maybe after today I'll be spending a little bit more time down here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a question, I guess, for both of you. This is from Lalitha. Thank you for the question. How concerned should we be about the increasing heat?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, look, obviously we should all be aware of it, and hopefully we all are aware of it. It's not all doom and gloom. There's people around the world who are working on ways for us to adapt, and hopefully, it's going to happen. It is happening, and we can make that part of our daily lives. But look, certainly anything we can do to help stem the flow, if you like, is going to be valuable, even down to a person-by-person, household-by-household scale.
That's a really lovely answer. And I would add that, yes, I will say we should be concerned because, as we know, heat waves are the most deadly disaster, and heat waves are the things that we can pin most closely to climate change. All heat waves around the world now have the fingerprint of climate change on them. So they are all being made worse, more intense and more frequent because the planet is almost 1.5 degrees warmer than it was 150 years ago when these observations were taken. And so I think Angus is right. We need to get prepared for the fact that the world is warmer and is going to be warmer, but also do everything we can to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And that means moving away from fossil fuels absolutely as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a tough question. Thank you for both of you.
It was a good question. We all need to ask it every day.
No, good. Back to you, Linden. So do you have any advice? I love this question. Do you have any advice about keeping your own weather diaries at home? I know. Be part of the library one day.
Yes, that's a great question. I think recording dates of flowering is really important. A dear friend this morning sent me a photo saying, my flowers have started flowering. I wrote it down in my diary. And there are projects that you can be a part of to help you do that. Climate Watch is a really really good citizen science project where you can record the flowering of your jacaranda plant or plenty of other native and introduced species around Australia and around the world. There are lots of programs like that. If you want to get a decent weather station, yeah, you're welcome to do that as well. But there's not a lot of records around the world that are taken with the purpose of monitoring climate change. Most of us, we record the weather so we know what's going to happen outside, right? And the same is the case for a lot of these historical observations. So to take weather observations for 100 years in one place is very tricky, and I don't think you need to do that. But being aware of the world around you and noticing changes that you see, sharing them with other people can be a really valuable way to engage and make other people more aware too.
Can I just throw something in there? It reminds me of a story I heard about taking your own weather observations, which is a great thing to do, but do make sure you read and understand how the measurement tools work, because I did hear about someone who was taking their own rainfall observations with a little rain gauge, but they hadn't quite got the memo that you have to clear it out at the end of each day. So they had 5 mils of rain the first day, 10 mils the second day, 20 mils the third day, and it was getting wetter and wetter.
Yeah.
Climate change is here.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I think one for both of you. So I like this question. Thank you for Todd, from Todd. If you had the chance to go back in time and observe one historical event with modern observing systems,
oh wow,
which one would it be? You might need some thinking time for this one.
Got one.
Good one. Okay, great.
All right,
great.
There was, and we're talking about heat waves a lot today, but there was a heat wave in 1896. It was a big one. It was a bad one. It was very long. If you search for it, it's an event in Australia that looms really large in our memory. But it's also a heat wave where some weather stations recorded really, really high temperatures. Now, doing the detective work that I've just shared, we were able to go back in and say, oh, the thermometer was housed in a strange way and it was exposed to a bit more sunlight than it should have been. So definitely it was a heat wave, but the values, they're probably not as high as the original ones. We need to have a look at them. These kinds of values have been used for a long time for people who don't accept the science of climate change to say, oh, look, it was really hot in that 1896 heat wave, therefore climate change isn't real. And I'd love to go back in time equipped with a modern standard thermometer and be able to compare the two and put that question to bed and say, yeah, it was hot. Heat waves are a part of our history, but they're happening more and more frequently now. And yeah, we have the comparison. It would also be fun to go back to 1896 and see what it was like. What about you?
Yeah, I've got one. Well, if you couldn't tell from my accent, I've spent a lot of time in New Zealand most of my life, and so this one's actually from across the ditch over in New Zealand. I might get some of the details wrong on this one, but it was a temperature observation from around about 1920.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was observed to be much, much colder than anything on record across New Zealand. And this observation has been hotly debated ever since as to whether it was a mistake or whether it was actually that cold, because much like what we were looking at before, there was also lots of press, news articles and other observations from around the time that were saying it was very cold, but this one just stuck out as being particularly cold, and it's had quite a history. This one observation is going back and forth as to how reliable it was or whether it was a misreading. So going back and being able to prove once and for all whether that was the coldest temperature ever recorded in New Zealand would be pretty fascinating.
Amazing. I love how it was hotly contested too.
Coolly contested.
I like that. Yeah, I like how you did that.
But this sort of stuff still happens. Even recently in the news, there was a pressure record that was allegedly broken in Australia, really high air pressure that was recorded. And this detective work is still being done. We had to go in and think, okay, well, how was the barometer calibrated and what kind of conversions were applied and that kind of stuff. And in the end, that pressure record was deemed to be inaccurate, so it was removed. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. That's right. No, you're bang on the money. The pressure was very high and it was approaching an all-time record.
Yeah.
One weather station did clock in at that record, but as Linden says, the calibration had to be analysed and it was found to be not fully reliable, so just fell short of the all-time pressure record just earlier this year.
Yeah, there you go. So fascinating. Okay, so we've got time for one more question. So in your careers and in your opinions, to both, what have been the coolest technological advancements in helping forecast the weather, and what are you looking to in the future to help? Futuristic thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the technological advancements, it's just always surging along the path of more advanced, more intelligent and more highly resolved or more precise, more detailed weather computation. We call it computer modelling, where it's when a big, powerful supercomputer attempts to calculate what's going to happen in the atmosphere, and it does it based on physics equations. It's an amazing system, and it gives you an idea of what's going to happen in 6 hours, in 12 hours, in 24 hours, in 3 days, in 5 days. And all the time, those computers, those calculations are getting more finely tuned, they're getting better resolution, they're getting more accurate. And every time I see a new iteration come out every year or two, it just blows my mind. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think watching that evolution and things get more and more highly resolved, you can also see us moving from a place where we go from the past. This is what happened in the past. This is what's happening now. This is what could be happening in the next 1, 2, 5, 7 days. And then this is what could be happening in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Not exactly what the weather's going to be on your 50th birthday, but more and more accuracy because those models are getting better at kind of talking to each other. And I think that's really exciting. For me, it's always about connecting the past to the present to help us get a better picture of the future.
Yeah. So incredible. I mean, there's so much to look forward to, I guess. That's great. Well, thank you, Angus, for coming in and answering a few questions. And Linden, thank you so much for your presentation. And for both of you for answering all those questions. Thank you out there for all your questions. That was, incredible. And it was great to see everything that you brought in today. So we actually only have one final mid-afternoon masterclass, but that is tomorrow at 2 p.m. It's the science of beer and winemaking in a changing climate. There's some connections there, a little bit from what we're talking about. So it's with Dr. Charles Pagel and Billy Zinus. So they will explore how scientific knowledge is improving process efficiency and product quality in modern brewing and winemaking. And we will discover how Australian winemakers are adapting to a changing climate. Very connected. So if you'd like to tune in for that, make sure you register online. There should be a link in the chat, but there's lots more details on the Science Festival website, so you can head over there. But that's it for today. Thank you once again. It was so great to chat to you both, and thank you everyone for joining us. See you tomorrow.